Hello. So this is my first vlog about learning to drive an HGV. So I've spent most of, after a brief stint in the RAF, I then went into management consulting at KPMG and then joined the banking system in the City of London, and I've done various jobs from corporate finance to begin with, then worked on the trading floor on the interest rate desk, where we looked at financial instruments to do with hedging interest rate exposures. Then I worked in commodities at Barclays Capital for a while, and then in risk management in various roles, effectively looking at the regulatory risk of an investment bank. So that's how I started my life, and then later on got married to somebody who, well, as everybody does, who you think they love you, and then that didn't end well. We had a son who I very rarely see now, and it's very difficult for me to get to see him for one reason or another, even though I want to. Like everybody, if you've got a son, you want to see them every day and not once a week, or in my case twice a year. So I decided that I'm going to have a complete change of career for a number of reasons. One of them being divorce. Another reason is the government, in their wisdom, have brought in a lot of changes to the way people work in banks, and I was a contractor, and I like contracting, and I used working in banks on a contract to fund all the private ventures that I wanted to do, but now they've killed that off, and so either in actual fact, the way it's turned out with these IR35 rules is that it's like being permanently employed but without any of the benefits of permanent employment. And under the old system, of course, you didn't pay as much personal tax, but you paid a lot of other taxes, like corporation tax, plus you collected the VAT, and everybody says this is neutral. It's not really. If you're not offsetting your VAT, it's not neutral. So they lose that effectively, or potentially they lose it. Depends on how you do work. And so the only thing left to do now, if you wanted to work in that environment, is to work through what they call an umbrella company, which, in essence, an umbrella company acts like a company. They calculate your pay-as-you-earn, national insurance, taxes, and whatever else, but you get no employment rights whatsoever. So if the company you're working for decides to get rid of you, it's a day's notice. If the agent, certainly the umbrella company, that if you stop earning, they've got no obligation to keep paying you, because effectively all they're really doing is they're invoicing the company on your behalf, deducting pay-as-you-earn taxes, VAT, not VAT, but charging the VAT, I suppose. So anyway, so on and so forth, and then passing on what's left to you. So effectively, any advantage to working as a contractor, which is the so-called flexible workforce, which governments tend to want, have gone. And so all it's left with is either get a permanent job, in which case you get employment rights, or you end up effectively as an employee with no employment rights, and somehow they don't. The government, probably the civil service, I mean the government. I mean, what do they care? But they saw it as people getting away with tax, avoiding NI, all these things. However, of course, you pay less, or it depends how you do it. You pay less NI, and you pay less personal tax. But most people don't have to pay, for example, corporation tax, which can be £30,000-40,000. So when you add it all together, there was a slight advantage of being an employee, and there are some disadvantages. So, for example, as an employee, normally you will get. Let me just change this. Normally you will get a pension, holiday pay, so on and so forth, and life insurance. Which often covers the whole family as well. So of course you pay some kind of tax on your P11D for those things. But the reality is, what it does is it prevents you from using that route to generate funds that you can then invest in other products that many people have got in mind, especially if you're working in the software side of the business. So the governments have killed a whole killed off a whole raft of the workforce that paid a lot of tax, but quite often, as in my case, we didn't pay ourselves the full amount, so we allowed money to accumulate into the company, so that in between our contracts we could involve ourselves in software business. Everybody wants to, not everybody, but most people want to set up their own business, and IT has been one of those areas where many people have done very well out of. So it's kind of, it kills off that little innovation element in like the workforce, and then it's killed the ability to be able to have a flexible workforce with slight not really any financial advantages, because once you've taken into account pensions and life insurances and all these various benefits, it's costing the same company roughly the same. You pay a little bit less tax, and it's not a lot. You can go online and put in the various different incomes versus expenses, and so on and so forth. There's not a lot in it. I mean, it might be a few £1,000s, maybe a little bit more, but that's your that was always felt that was your compensation for not being able to have any workers' rights. So they've changed the system now that everybody has everybody that's a contractor now gets paid exactly the same as the person who's permanent, but has got no protections whatsoever. 1 day's notice. They can be there 10 years. And then as soon as they decide they don't want you anymore, you're gone. It's as simple as that. And they do this by having these intermediate structures, umbrella companies or whatever it is. So many people around my age, at least, in their 50s, don't want to work or either want a permanent job, and when you get into your 50s, why would anybody take you on when they can get it? I mean, these days they don't seem to care about the experience that you've gained over the years, so they're looking for younger people, and even a 40-year-old is more valuable to them than a 50-year-old, because they've got plenty of experience too. And the only reason you used to get work as a contractor at this kind of age is because you've got some very specific skills that they may need. And also you can use those skills in different departments, different areas, and you're not part of the corporate promotion. It's usually, of course, in a bank everybody's stabbing each other in the back because they all want to get promoted, and that's all they talk about all year. So they're looking at their little managerial which is more administrative than it used to be. When I started 25 years ago, a manager would take over or project manager would take over a project, and if it wasn't delivered, that was it. You were finished. Now it's more project administration. So they have all sorts of committees to decide, when things are going wrong, which they always do go wrong. Nobody really controls it. Everybody escalates up a chain of command to a higher authority. They don't really know what's going on. They sit on many of these, kind of committees and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, it's just killed off something that was working. It's a flexible workforce. It gave opportunities for experienced people to earn reasonable money without having to be promoted up the chain of command, the managerial structure, going back to my RAF days. And get a kind of an opportunity to fund your own ideas and innovations, of which some, of course, will become highly successful, generate lots of perhaps international business, who knows what. The government have just killed it off for a few $100 million. So they say. They did the same thing in the public sector, and they estimated they're going to get an extra $800 million in tax. Well, it's a lot of money to people like us, but they waste that kind of money all the time. If you look at Gordon Brown, he sold gold at the bottom of the market and wasted, what was it? I think if you revalued it now, 18 billion. And they go around patting themselves on the back and saying how great they are, and so on and so forth. And yet, so that's where it's ended up. So personally, I was not just for that reason, but also because of getting divorced. I mean, I married somebody in less than 2 years. We had a child together, and as soon as the child was born, I was no longer necessary, I suppose. And then all she did from then on was plan, to effectively get divorced. So, and she did it in such a way that it left me unable to really work in that industry anymore. Not that I would have done anyway. So, this vlog, which is not really for public consumption, it's more to record my thoughts, is about a slight change of career, and I'm doing two things. I'm doing a course on plumbing, heating, and it's a time where the government are looking at removing all kinds of fossil fuels, including gas, but they will be replaced by other systems, such as warm pumps, which was actually a system that I've already had. And then the other thing I'm thinking of doing is HGV. That I can fly aircraft. I used to own one a long time ago, and I just like the idea of driving an articulated lorry. There's a bit of a shortage, I read, at the moment, but it's not really driven by that. It was more driven by the fact that I'd like to have different strings to me, but I've decided I'm not going to work in a bank anymore. Well, so I decided that a few years ago, that I'm not going to work in a bank anymore. I'm not interested in working under these new rules. I don't want a permanent job, that's for sure. I've already been there, done that. Became a director, and I don't want to do that again. So I've decided on to try my hand at HGV driving, so which is now called LGV. So I'm studying I've got some recommended CD-ROMs. I mean, I can't personally recommend them yet, but from what I've seen, they look to be okay, and they've got all, tells you what to do and so on and so forth. And one thing I did do, I'm not saying that, well, it is HGV, I suppose. When I was at Dahran Air Base in the early 90s, and we had nothing to do, to be fair. It's in the RAF, and it's not like being a soldier where you're on the front line of a war or this or that. You're typically 1,000 miles behind enemy lines, and most of the time you're bored out of your tree. The flying program wasn't packed, and so I did a course, an aircraft towing course, which was interesting, to be fair. I think as far as I remember, it was 2 or 3 days, and I did enjoy it. And there's more to it than with these things than meets the eye. Typically, aircraft, as soon as they land, they have to be refueled, and this is for safety reasons. So, half-empty tanks can become a hazard. So they're refueled, and once they're refueled, they weigh about 30 tons, 35 tons, or whatever. And then, of course, then they need to be, or often they need to be then towed and pushed back into a hangar. Anyway, I think it was a 3-day course, so I signed up for any course, to be honest. Just to break up with the monotony. I was there for 13 months with a few breaks, and I quite enjoyed it, actually. But you have to learn all about the centre of gravity. These things have got wings with external stores, missiles, all sorts of things. Fuel tanks, drop tanks as they call them, although they weren't allowed to be dropped, I guess because of the expense. And huge, these were Tornadoes. They've gone out of service now, but they were brand new, or newish at the time. They've got these huge fins. The wings could sweep, but when they were on the ground, they were swept forward. Can't remember how many degrees now. I think it's probably about 30 degrees, I guess. So with all these bits and bobs hanging off, and a very large fin, and just to make things more interesting, hangars have usually got an arc. So they're not square like a garden shed kind of thing. They're usually rounded over the top. So as you get towards the edge, you've got this huge fin. And in actual fact, one of the guys I worked with, I think he was called James, who's Scottish guy, very clever guy, very nice guy. He was in charge. They have somebody in charge of the movement of the aircraft, because they're so expensive. It's not for the faint-hearted. Anyway, slight error. One of the fins hit the side of the curved hangar roof, and from then on he was, and that's why I can't remember his name. From then on he was called Jimmy the Fin, which is a bit unfair, really, because these things do happen. You have to be very careful. Anyway, so I did this aircraft towing course, quite enjoyed it, and I like trundling around when we've got nothing to do. Prefer flying, so I did this course, and I think I pushed up half a dozen, or pulled half a dozen aircraft, and pushed them back into the hangar. So anyway, that's my introduction. A bit of background, which I'll probably go into a little bit more if anyone's interested. I mean, I obviously know it. It's a bit boring to me, these things take the toll on your life, and I've got to an age now where I'm absolutely sick to death of banks, finance. I can talk about it, but I don't want to do it anymore, or I don't want anything to do with it. And it's not like a nervous breakdown or a midlife crisis. I think I've already been through those a few times. I've had a Porsche, and which they always look cool. Well, as a friend of mine told me, says you look cool in a Porsche driving into the car park, but you don't look so cool trying to get out of it because they're so low. A Porsche is a car that should be driven by some teenage, or not so much teenagers, maybe in your early 20s, when you're out looking for a wife or a girlfriend or whatever, you were trying to impress. Yet they can't afford one, and by the time you can afford one, you're either in the drudgery of a marriage, you've been divorced already, or you end up, to some extent like I did, is getting married to somebody 25 years younger, which is great. But I mean, who'd buy a second-hand car if they could afford a new one? But these things tend to go horribly wrong, and it certainly did in my case, in a big way. And somebody I met whilst I was overseas, and having a good time I wasn't single actually. I had a girlfriend already, but she managed to crowbar herself in between us, which I do regret. Well, I certainly regret now. But there we are. So I put all these, these various strings to my bow that I plan on doing. I've watched a few vlogs of people who are doing these kinds of things, and so you always have an extreme in these things. You've got guys who say it's the most monotonous, mundane, and boring job ever. Driving an HGV, or as they call it now, an LGV, as I've found out. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got guys who are relatively new to it, to be fair, who think it's fantastic, it's dead easy, they love it, and this, that, and the other. My view on, I've done a few different things in my life, and even different things within the area of international finance, and I've also worked overseas, Frankfurt, for example. But one of the things that I laugh about, well, inside, is that when somebody's new to something, they think it's the bee's knees. I think everything's great, blah blah, and then there's like a curve where it kind of goes up because you learn something new. Then it peaks, and you think, oh, this is great. Oh, it's got whatever it is, 6,000 horsepower or whatever it might be, or 50,000 pounds of thrust if it was a jet engine, or whatever it is. So there's the trepidation about, and therefore the excitement about learning a new skill. Then you go through this kind of a secondary learning period where you've got a license, whatever, or not, and then you're let out on your own. Of course, that's a learning curve. There's nobody sitting next to you telling you what to do. This is particularly important, by the way, when you learn to fly. There's the same flying. Taking off is optional, but landing's compulsory. But there's like a secondary period until you could become comfortable with it. And once you've learned something, and then you've become comfortable doing it, whatever it might be, could be flying an aircraft, HGV, articulated lorry, whatever, massive ship. Once you get confidence in any skill and you become comfortable with that skill, that's when that's when you turn the corner. It become boring. Then it can become boring and mundane. So if you're talking to a guy that's been doing something for 20 years, he's more likely to say, "Oh, yeah, I hate this job." I mean, of course, there are some people out there absolutely love it. Anoraks, they can, especially in the aircraft world. I mean, they can tell you every type of every aircraft, what fuel it uses, what type of radar it's got, what its, full up weight is, takeoff weight, landing speeds, God knows what. And there's nothing against that. I know. I've got nothing against that at all, because these are the people that they really enjoy it. And when I was looking across different vlogs, there are some people who say, "Yeah, don't do this. Whatever you do, I've been doing it for 15 years. It's mundane. It's boring. It doesn't pay well. Or it pays the same now as it did 15 years ago. 20 years ago, whatever it is." And then you're going to get the other guys who are probably relatively new to it. "Oh, this is the best thing. I used to be a scaffolder. This is much easier. I love it. Blah blah blah." And then you get people somewhere in between. But also you get of course, even in HGV you get the anoraks. Anyway, I've always wanted to take the test. Not necessarily to drive professionally, but just as a challenge, because I'm sure it's not easy. And a friend of mine actually, on his when he left the Royal Air Force, he did it on his resettlement course, and he ended up driving a bus for about 6 months, I think it was. But he failed the Class 1. So I think he did I think it was called the PSV. And then, whatever. But he didn't. It wasn't his intention to drive lorries and buses. But it was just a course that was offered to him, paid for by Her Majesty's government. And I mean, you can do all sorts. Somebody did wax polishing or furniture polishing or whatever it was. So there was a whole range of things you could have done. Anyway. So that always stuck in mind. I mean, that was 20 odd years ago, 25 years ago. And he failed the articulated lorry aspect of it. But he got through I think it was the PSV, which allowed him to drive buses, which he did for, when he left the Air Force. He couldn't get any other job straight away. I think it was a bad time to leave I think it was around about the early 90s, in mid-90s, I guess. So he was struggling a little bit. So he got this job, and they thoroughly enjoyed it for a while until something better came up. So, but I always wanted to. I like big things, powerful things. So I always wanted to fly. In fact, the first thing I wanted to do was be a train driver. So I applied to, as it was then, British Rail. Nothing. That was a very bad time. For jobs. Margaret Thatcher had just, taken over, and unemployment was rising, and so on. So I applied to be a train driver. Really ended up as a mathematician. But and then I wanted to do. I didn't apply for lorries. I never thought about that at the time. But I mean, what child is not impressed when they see a huge, as it was then, I suppose, a diesel electric engine unit pulling the carriages into a big station. So anyway, applied for that, applied to the Air Force, obviously got that, and then that was that. But it's just the idea of this absolutely huge, heavy, powerful truck, and they are huge. And I mean, if you look at truckers in America, I mean, the roads are absolutely massive. Whereas if you look at these huge trucks that circumnavigate the UK, I mean, I can't imagine what it'd be like in Devon and Cornwall with a 40-ton articulated lorry kamikazing its way up and down these lovely country lanes, caravans coming the other way with inexperienced drivers, and so on. So I imagine it's probably a real challenge. And of course, like in anything, when you look into it, there's always the guy who's, oh, don't do it. It's a difficult job, or you're doing it. When you look at, they all comment on each other's as well. You're doing it all wrong. This and that, and there's a lot to it, or there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. So I always thought, all right, so there's one thing. If you learn to fly at some point, and for me it was pretty early on, you can't, you've got to do so many hours before you can solo in an aircraft, because each lesson covers a specific topic. So it might be stalls, obviously takeoff, landing, and then what they call circuits, where you fly around the circuit. And typically you would learn in a single engine piston with a propeller. But there will come a point, right? So, and I think it's six hours. It might be 7. And I think it's 6 hours. So you've done 6 lessons, which teach you something to do with either handling the aircraft, which is surprisingly easy. I mean, there aren't that many controls. A little bit complicated, slightly overcomplicated in some aircraft. Certainly more complicated in a jet. And then you've got circuit heights, different speeds. When you take off, you're actually taking off on a speed. So you will just raise the nose to maintain a certain speed. So that might be 75 knots, whatever it is. So you have to learn all these various components. And then once you've done that, of course, you'll get to a point where you're instructed, and it's coming, but you just don't know when. And they don't tell you, so you no advance notice. You do a few circuits. They're never perfect. You've got different. Every day is different anyway. You've got a different wind direction, different wind speed, and so on. But that at some point, 6 or 7 hours, maybe 10 for some, maybe 15 for others. The instructor, your instructor, it's usually the same. It is the same instructor. They know you quite well by this stage. Is going to turn around and say, right, okay, I'm getting out. I want you to do a circuit, take off, and land. And that's at that point, you've got to consider that once you're off the ground, touch wood, which is the case in most cases, there are no failures, no technical failures. But you've gone through all of the procedures to do to action a failure. So if you get smoke in the cockpit, if you lose your engine on takeoff, which is not the best of things to happen, if you lose your engine whilst you're in the air, it's probably the second worst thing. But of course these things do glide. So, but the point is, it's something that you'll never get in anything else, because if you get into a huge LGV 40 tons, whatever it is, probably won't be 40 tons when you're learning, but once you get into a huge LGV, the worst comes to the worst, you have a total nervous breakdown or whatever, or you just don't feel you can do it or whatever, you can slow down, stop, turn off the engine and cry or whatever, or complete your nervous breakdown, whatever it might be. Of course you can't do that in an aircraft. You've at least got to come back round and land. So I always think to myself, well, nothing can be more nerve-wracking than your first, well, not just the first solo, but the first number of flights that you do on your own, because literally you never feel like you're up to it, I should say. You're always up for it, but you always feel like you could do with an extra couple of hours of training before you do this or that. But you do feel that all the way through the training course. So when you look at the huge size of an LGV, let's start calling it what it should be called these days. We all know it as HGV. It's the European Union for you. So you've got when it comes to an LGV, you've got this huge thing. And I never overly concern. I never overly concern myself with learning new things, but it certainly would be a massive challenge. And these things are. I suppose once you've done anything for a few years, it's like it's like boiling an egg or riding a bike. But there's an excitement to it that you don't get. No disrespect to accountants, pain in the ass that they are, but I can't imagine an accountant going through years and years of training, and it's not easy, I'm sure. They learn all of these different methods, regulations, accounting practices, whatever they do, but I don't think they'll ever get the excitement, or maybe they do, I don't know. They do look like they're easily excitable. Right now I've qualified, I'm going to go and sit on a desk, look at a computer screen for the next 45 years, and of which the last 20 they're probably clock watching. And I have seen that happen. When I was younger, I was working in an office. I've worked once I'd left the Air Force, I've worked most of my life in an office. Did a master's degree in financial mathematics, blah blah, PhD, so on and so forth. And I'm not saying it's the most boring job in the world. It's not, because it's meant that, well, it can be. Not anymore for me, but initially. You get involved in new things, you get involved in it, and there's a satisfaction to, if it's a project-based work or whatever, there's a satisfaction to that. There's a satisfaction to working on a trading floor, which I enjoyed, for a period, and so on. But there isn't that kind of operational kind of aspect to it. If you learn to drive, and I haven't done this, well, I've learned to drive a car and I've learned to fly an aircraft, but I've never done HGV. I've never driven anything so big, because even the aircraft that I flew were small, relatively. So you've got this like kind of point where you're gonna get let loose. It's probably not the right word. You don't go solo, I suppose. You'll always have an instructor or an examiner, or an instructor or an examiner. But beyond that, once you've at least shown them that you're relatively safe. It's only over an hour and a half or whatever, or an hour, whatever it is. But that you're relatively safe to go out on your own. So. But like I said, there is this. What I'm hoping is, look, it's massive. It's obviously heavy. There are some things that I've experienced that might be helpful to know. I know about acceleration, deceleration. From a car it's easy, but even with aircraft, once you hit the ground with flying speed, which you do in a jet, you've got to bring the speed under control. Sometimes the landing gear doesn't come down, so there's all sorts of potential hazards. But the one thing about an HGV is, with its size and everything else, the worst thing you're going to do, well, apart from kill somebody, and let's hope it doesn't go there, the worst thing that can happen is that you've got to stop. So wherever you are, whether you've passed your test, whether you've been doing it 10 years, 20 years, whatever, if you end up going down a one-way street that you can only reverse out of, and you've got a load of traffic behind you, the worst thing that can happen is you're just going to be embarrassed. And if that's the worst thing that can happen, I mean, an embarrassing situation, as we used to call in the Air Force, would be one that could end up in an early exit. So if you were, for example, I mean, lots of bad things can happen to you around military aircraft. But the worst thing that I can imagine, I mean, of course they can catch fire, I guess, but then you just get out of it and put some distance between you and the fireball. You don't have to look for somewhere to land. You don't have to bail out. I mean, one of the first things I learned was that if I was flying at night with a single engine and you lose it, you abandon the aircraft. So, which typically meant pointing it at a dark area of the ground, undoing your harness, toppling the plane upside down and falling out, and then having to deploy your own chute. I mean, these weren't ejection seats. So that's the way I think about that. I'm not nervous at all yet. Obviously there will be time for nerves, but being nervous, it's a necessary thing, and it sharpens your thinking, and it focuses the mind. So when people say, "Oh no, I wasn't nervous," whatever they've done, I don't believe them, because they might not show it. Some people show it more than others, but even when your hand shakes, when you've got the nerves, and I've been in a few sticky situations where that's happened, that doesn't mean you're a coward. What that is, that's adrenaline pumping into your body, the fight or flight instinct, and of course another reaction is to empty your bowels. And I've known this happen with people when they were doing their parachute jumping course in the Air Force. And this is not like a civilian course. I mean, these parachutes are made to get you from wherever you are down to the ground in shortest possible time. Not these that you can, sail around and then at the last minute pull the cords and effectively plop onto the ground. These things are bang. So you've got all of these things going through your mind, something new, very excited about it. Don't know whether it will stay that way, but if you're not excited about it now, then you never will be, and you probably shouldn't even attempt it. So I've ordered the CD-ROMs because there's a lot of, they've professionalised it. I mean, I didn't know what they did before, but now I know what it's changed to. They've kind of professionalised it. So you've got to do this CPC, which is the professional training for the theory for drivers. And I've looked through it, and I mean these things, the things you would expect a driver, an experienced driver probably already knows. But they've thrown a few extras in. It looks like they're being, everybody's being asked to be more eco-friendly. So there's training. I mean, everybody knows if you're heavy-footed, if you've got a heavy right foot, as we used to call it, then you're gonna waste petrol. If you drive a Porsche, I mean, you're not going to drive it in an eco-friendly way normally, because why do you buy a Porsche? You buy it to attract the wrong sort of woman. One. And secondly, because you get a bit of a thrill from accelerating fast and driving at high speed. And if you're going to do that, then a Porsche, I absolutely guarantee that you'll love driving a Porsche. I wish I'd have had one in my 20s rather than 40s, but that's just the way life. That's just the way life goes. And to be fair, I only bought one because I lived in Germany and had the possibility of driving it. Prior to that, I lived on the Isle of Canary Wharf, or I should say West Ferry, and driving a Porsche there would be an absolute nightmare because the clutch is so heavy. So I would, if you live in London, well, you don't need a car at all. But if you want to go away at weekends, whatever, then the best car to get is an automatic, because you're going to be sat in traffic for most of your journey. Where I lived, I used to go up the A13 to the M25, and then or if I was going up the M11, I'd go that way. I think I can't remember what that is now. But anyway, it's the A13. Then there's a big roundabout which is hilariously busy, even at night. And it's probably the A11 actually, but it goes on to the M11 or to the M25, and then once you get there, you kamikaze your way around that. It's always packed, and then get out into the sticks. But you very rarely need a car in London. So, and you certainly, if you did get one, how these people drive Porsches around London? I mean, they really must need an extension. Unless they just do it once a year or whatever. But there we are. So I'll vlog this. I don't know even whether I'm going to let anybody else watch it, but I might find it interesting myself, and maybe other people will find it interesting, perhaps family or whoever. But I've decided to do it because that's what everybody seems to do now. They're usually a lot younger than me, so maybe mine will be more boring, less hip. But I'm going to vlog the progress, and it actually started last week. I spoke to the instructor or a school which is very close to where I live. Very nice guy. I didn't really go there to sign up. I just went. It's actually a friend of mine who was talking about doing it. So I went on his behalf. I went to speak to this guy. Such a nice guy. Went through it all. Before I knew it, I was filling out the application form. He'd given me what they call it, the number of a doctor to do the medical. And the medical's now tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I know we're on Friday. So I don't even know whether I'll pass the medical. I'm guessing they'll check blood pressure and eyesight, for which I'll have to wear glasses now, I guess. And then once you do that, you fill out the application for you have to send your car driving license in. I think you've got to have a car driving license for a few years. You send that in with the application, and then they stick the provisional. I remember in my day, it were a paper one, obviously back then. You sent off, you got a provisional license, which I think lasted 2 years, and then you had, within that 2 years, I think, then you had to pass your test, whatever. Then it comes back, nice new one, but it was still a green thing in a plastic sachet kind of thing. But I think with this one, you send in the photo card one, and you've got to make sure the address is right on that. I've only just updated mine. It hasn't been updated for about 30 years, and it was still at my mum and dad's, who've both passed. So I did that, and so then you send that off, and then they stick the extra categories. I think it's C to begin with, and that's for the what used to be the Class 2, which is now called the C. LGV C. And then once you get that, then you can go and they'll book you in for a week of lessons, I think it is. So 4 days of lessons, and then on the 5th day you take the test, pass, fail. Then if you pass it, if you don't, I guess you have to rebook it. If you pass the test, then you move on to the class, what was the Class 1, which is now called the C+E, and that's your big, kind of articulated lorry, which is the prize, yeah. The Class 1 is probably hard enough. It's hard enough to pass, but it's kind of, to me, that's like kind of the gateway then to the real course, which is the Class 1. And that's where you drive the trailer, so you've got the little bit at the front and all the rest of it. And I've started doing the theory, the theory side of it, which is you do a theory, something called hazard perception. Having driven for 30 years, I absolutely know, and especially my time in London, hazard perception for me is second nature, and it probably is for most people that have been driving for a good 5-10 years or more. But these things are a little bit vague. They're absolutely correct, don't get me wrong, but you have to spot them immediately. They're constructed in such a way that they're not so easy. You have to practice them, obviously. Once you practice them, I suppose it will be plain sailing. But hazards in real life that you see and you come across all the time, you just naturally see them, and you do in a car anyway. You take action, you'll slow down or whatever you need. If two cars on both sides of the road and you're driving along the road and an HGV is coming the other way, you slow right down. If there's not enough room, I tend to pull in. An HGV driver is going to find that practically impossible where I live. So it would be impossible in London. So everybody else has to manoeuvre out of the way, I guess. So there's a theory test. Now I went through the theory test questions before. I've read up the notes and got 97%. So a lot of it overlaps with cars, or it's common sense. So one of them is, who's going to be affected most by a crosswind? A car, a lorry, a motorcyclist. Well, of course it's the motorcyclist. So a lot of these things are common sense. And they're certainly common sense if you've driven for a long time. So that's basically it. So if so I'm just looking at I've got this, I've just bought this DVD-ROM. If I can, I'll show you. If this shows up on, yeah. So here you are. So you got these are your, there's your theory that you've got to start and you read through. Shows your gear lever there, and hundreds and hundreds of pages, blah blah. And I think that's it's obviously going to be interesting for people that haven't really done it before. And there's a couple of them. So you've got the theory, the hazard perception test, which I think younger people will already know about, because I believe the hazard perception is now part of the car driving course. So just get that. It's part of the car driving course, but this is new, of course. When I did my test, I think you did half an hour, whatever it was, reverse around a corner, a 3-point turn, drive a little bit through traffic, and then at the end of the test, the examiner would just show you about 2 or 3 signs. What's this? And ask you a couple of questions. And that was that. Now it's all formalised. You have to do a separate theory test, hazard perception test, I guess. So kind of thought I'd got away with that, but I'm guessing they're going to use it on the LGV. So I'll give you an idea. If I get past tomorrow, of course, it could all end at the medical at my age. But I'm 56. I forgot to mention that. So whilst most people are probably thinking about taking retirement, I'm thinking of doing something else. Partly because I've got no choice. I've I've invested heavily in lifestyle rather than investments and properties, which many people are surprised, given that I've worked in investment banks for 25 years. But I did like to. I bought myself an aeroplane. I enjoyed that. I regretted it a bit when I had my son, but I didn't expect him to come along late in life. I was in my mid-40s by the time he was born. In fact, late 40s. So I kind of regret that now, a little bit. And then I've had the various Porsches, cars of all sorts. BMW X5 was probably the best one. Well, it's certainly the most comfortable one. Won't be buying BMW anymore, of course, because of Brexit. So my funeral will be the afternoon of my last shift. Hopefully not driving. By then I might have been put out to grass completely. But I'll be working until my last weeks rather than years. I'm not bothered about that too much. I've done different things. So I love the Royal Air Force, kind of. Just wanted to do something different. I couldn't fly because of a medical problem, so I left that. Looked at flying in civilian. Very difficult to get a job at the time. So I went into management consultancy, KPMG, or KPMG Pete Marwick as it was then. And then from then into investment banking, or merchant banking, I suppose they used to call it then, at Kleinwort Benson. But I'll fill that out as I go along if anybody's interested, and then see how I progress in this. I won't do a vlog on plumbing because it's great fun. I really enjoy it, and I work with a guy who's just absolutely mental, or did do. But it hasn't quite got the, there are vlogs on plumbing, and I know loads of them, and I really enjoy watching them, but they're about how you do something. So, right, you've got this, well, there's water coming out of that, it shouldn't be, how to fix it, and so on. Anyway, I'm probably boring. Well, I'm starting to bore myself. So if anyone ever gets to see this, I'll fill in the blanks as I go along, and you never know, it might be useful. There might be some guy sitting out there knocking on a bit, not talking about a teenager wondering what they're going to do with the rest of their life, but maybe somebody who's stuck in a job, and it can be a well-paid job. In the end, the money is worth less and less the more bored you are with the job, especially office jobs, or physical jobs. I guess I haven't done I haven't done a physical job since I left the Air Force, really. Anyway, somebody might find it interesting, and I guess even if it's only my own family, then it will have been worthwhile. Or even me, I might look at it in a year's time and think, what an idiot, why did you do that? Or even worse, what an idiot, why did you waste all that money and fail? I mean, anything's possible. But I'm not the sort of person that's ever thought, I've never thought about retiring. I mean, of course, now I have no choice since the divorce. But even before that, I've just thought, once you retire, you're just kind of waiting to die, if you know what I mean. So I've never really, I do know, honestly, I know people in their early 40s who are just clock watching, and they just can't wait to retire so they can just, like, I don't know, play golf or whatever it is. But I've never, I'd like to do that, by the way, but short of a lottery win, I don't think that's going to happen. And if you've got too much time on your hands, life becomes a little bit boring anyway. So I'm not so sure that I really even want to do that. So it's a bit, I mean, I suppose at some point I'll be, I mean, I put a bit of weight on over the lockdowns and all this COVID and, or Roni as we're calling it around here. But whilst I can do something, I'd like to do something different, and I haven't got that long left in working lifetimes and possibly other terms. I mean, I'm not aware that there's anything wrong with me, but obviously I know that in 30 years time I probably won't be around, possibly not even in 20. So I don't, it's kind of, if I can do something and get work that's different, and even if I only like it for 5 years, I'm nearly done anyway, kind of thing. Or if I become, fail a medical, or something that prevents me from doing anything. But I do know a guy who's still doing this, and he's 69. He's knocking on the door of 7. Absolutely loves it. I think he has to have a medical every year. I think above a certain age you have to have a medical every year, and as long as you can get through that, you can wear glasses and stuff, thankfully. But as long as you get through your medical, you can retire when you want to retire. So anyway, that's what I think. I'm not looking, even though I can't, which doesn't bother me. I'm not looking to retire anyway. I would rather do something different. And I'm not one of these, although I did banking for 25 years, I did lots of different things within a bank. It's not like it's one job. I've had about 10 different jobs, from the trading floor, which was, exciting to begin with at least, to what they call the back office. I spent a year in. And then the middle office, which is kind of where the front and the back, the front of the trading, the back office, they kind of mix together the risk, basically, looking at risk and other aspects. So I did lots of different things, but they were all desk based. They were all different levels of interest. Last 5 years, I learned to sleep with my eyes open. And I used to go to meetings where they used to talk absolute shite. New methods of doing things, like the end for me when somebody says, "Oh, you're part of a train," and that's what do you mean? It says, "Well, you're on this train." It was some sort of project thing. Call it agile. It's the most bureaucratic thing I've ever seen, or experienced, or witnessed. You're on a train on this aircraft carrier, and it's also all Americanized there. All the terminology. I was on the Nimitz. Anyway, enough of that. I might fill you in with that later on. But anyway, there's the introduction. It's probably gone on a lot longer than I intended, because once I start, I can't stop. And I'll fill you in with what's going on. Next one, I guess, will be, did I pass the medical? It'll be a very, very short vlog indeed. If it comes to the end of it tomorrow morning at whatever it is, 9 a.m. or 9:30, whenever it finishes. But I'll let you know one way or the other. And then I'll have to look elsewhere for work. Okay, thank you. All the best, and have a good weekend. Look after yourself.